Hey everybody, it's Swank Ivy again, and I'm back with another Letters to an Asexual. This is number 15. I saw a comment on Tumblr that was addressed to all of the asexual community, and I will get right into reading it to you right now. It goes like this. Someone please tell me how asexuals are discriminated against, why they're included in LGBTQ. It's the same discrimination as someone saying they don't want kids. Please tell me what someone being asexual has to do with infringing on their rights and being bullied. Are we oppressed? Well, I think oppression might be a little bit of a sticky word to describe what goes on because oppression does suggest an intentional institutional discrimination against a group of people, but it is true that asexual people experience prejudice and discrimination. I should say, first of all, that nearly all of the queer people I've talked to about this understand that a lot of the things that the asexual community deals with and the things that they deal with come from the same root, which is the heteronormative society. So our communities really are natural allies, even in places that we don't actually overlap, which is also really significant because there are a lot of asexual people who are also GLB or T or both. And I think that I've had some really excellent experiences being invited into queer spaces and being interviewed by queer-friendly publications. But there is this minority of people in the queer community that absolutely rages when we suggest we could experience prejudice or discrimination for being asexual. People will tell us that the worst thing that ever happens to us is that people make us sad or say mean things to us while they have real problems. After all, they're being killed for their orientation. I really don't think people should have to be killed before a topic is declared worthy of discussion. But I guess if you have to be killed coming out of a gay bar, we'll find out what happens if there's ever an ace bar for us to come out of. We actually don't think we have it worse than the LGBT community, but the Oppression Olympics really never does anyone any favors. We're just saying that we legitimately do have issues specifically related to our sexual orientation that deserve to get talked about. Really, the only thing that the asexual community has worse than the LGBT community is the invisibility issue. We're less included, we're more erased. But that experience really does lead more to being left out of the public dialogue than it does to discrimination. What's really offensive is that this tiny minority of people who don't want to be inclusive insists, without even looking or asking, that there's nothing for us to complain about except that occasionally people don't understand us. But if these discriminatory and prejudicial things are happening to us, you might ask, what are they and what do they look like? Housing and job discrimination. It may come as something of a shock to most people, but there actually was a study done on asexual discrimination. And this study was done in 2012, which was administered to both straight people and non-straight people. The word asexual was defined as we in the community define it, and then people were asked to give their opinions about us and also say whether they would be more or less likely to hire us or rent to us. And overall, a very strong bias emerged toward asexual people. We were rated as being robotic and asocial and alien and less human. And all of those things were ascribed to us, saying that we would make worse employees, we would be problem tenants, we might be psychopaths or something like that. And, that's all really very obvious discrimination. Some people might say, hey, you just did this scientific study with people just giving their opinions. How do you know that it would happen in real life? Well, there have also been asexual people who describe exactly what you would expect to see if those attitudes are true. And they said, if there's sexual discussions at work or they're asked about their relationships, it seems like when they don't participate in what's considered the majority culture, they're considered not as friendly. They're considered a problem employee, and a couple of people have actually offered anecdotal evidence that they may have been fired because they were asexual or because of things that stem from their asexual orientation. And whenever somebody says, oh, that's just an anecdote or that's just an opinion, if you show them the scientific survey, they shouldn't be able to say, no, that's only just something that happened to one person. And then if you just show them the scientific study, they'll say, oh, well, that won't happen in real life. You've got both. You've got what you'd expect to see and what you're actually seeing. So there is quite a strong crop of evidence there that we can and will and do see asexual people being regarded as less desirable people all around. Adoption denial. During a talk that spotlighted asexuality, there was a therapist who said that he had anecdotally heard from some asexual people that they had been denied an adoption because they were asexual. And the interview went something like this. They come to the adoption agency, they're a male and female married couple, and they get asked, why wouldn't you have your own children? Are you infertile? And they say, no, we're asexual. We would prefer not to conceive our own. And the response was, if you're asexual, you're not fit to be married. So that's another way that institutionally they were denied a right that would otherwise have been granted to them as perceived to be heterosexual married couple. Consummation laws. The idea is that a couple is not really married unless they're having sex. In some states, one member of a married couple can legally annul a marriage if they don't receive the consummation that they were expecting. Oddly enough, this does not apply to infertility. Finding out your spouse can't create children with you, even though you wanted to procreate, is not something you can invoke for an annulment. But the sex part is. Asexual people aren't the only people affected by this, but it does affect repulsed asexual people disproportionately. There's also an intersectional issue with immigrants. One of the ways they determine if you're an actual married couple, rather than just someone who's trying to stay in the country legally, is asking invasive questions to make sure you're having sex. Anti-discrimination law. Some states in the U.S. are actually now including asexuality in their anti-discrimination law. Vermont and New York are the two states that currently have asexuality mentioned in their legal documents, and as of my making of this video, Texas is considering it, and there should be more following. It's also been examined in some legal papers and from legal and social standpoints in documented evidence that asexual people are apparently having these issues if they're having to write it into law and mention them within a legal context. Corrective rape. If you've seen my other videos, you have probably noticed that I receive a fair amount of threats. Some of them are death threats, some of them are rape threats, and those things manifest in person as well. I have actually experienced people trying to force themselves on me because I told them I was not interested. Of course, this is not something that is unique to the asexual community. It's basically a horrible thing that happens to people who make themselves sexually unavailable for any reason if there's a rapist around. But for asexual people, it is a heightened issue because just like, say, lesbians, we are much less likely to make ourselves sexually available to men. And this is not just a women's issue, but it does happen more frequently to primarily asexual women, that we are considered frigid, we're considered in need of somebody to basically violently intrude into what they present as us being broken and fix us with their penis. So this has not been just an isolated set of incidents. This is a very common narrative, and unfortunately it does actually sometimes happen. It doesn't just stop at threats. So this has been documented throughout our community as a real risk, and it is something we face. Poor representation in media. Martin from Godivas. He called himself asexual on the show, but then got testosterone treatments and was fixed. That show is cancelled. Poppy from Huge. She identified explicitly as asexual and described being aromantic, but it was mentioned once and never brought up again. This is fine, but not gigantic as far as representation. Also, that show is also cancelled. And we have Gerald from Shortland Street, probably the best example of an asexual character. He's biromantic and explicitly explores his relationship with asexuality throughout the series. It's a popular soap that airs in New Zealand. Guess what country has a really awesome asexual community? New Zealand! Meanwhile, in the US, the show House MD had an asexuality storyline and it handled it horribly. A patient claiming to be asexual puzzled her doctor when she explained why she and her asexual husband didn't use birth control. The doctor mentioned it to his good buddy Dr. House. House said, "Anyone who doesn't want sex is dead, dying, or lying." He proceeded to bet his buddy that he would prove there was something medical behind this asexual ruse, and by the end of the episode, the asexual husband was diagnosed with a pituitary tumor that had been inhibiting his sex drive, and the asexual wife admitted she had been lying, so her husband wouldn't feel bad about not desiring her. Dr. House, the winner of the bet, reiterates that everyone wants sex unless they're dead, dying, or lying, and that's the message we leave with. After that episode, the web searches for asexuality went through the roof, and several asexual people mentioned having previously supportive friends and family turn on them and beg them to go to the doctor to get treated for their illness. I think you can bet that if any popular TV show fixed a gay guy, there would be hell to pay, but we're still fair game to invoke as a disorder. Oh, and speaking of which, common misdiagnosis as a mental disorder. In the book that is most commonly used by the psychological community to diagnose people with mental disorders, which is called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, asexuality was basically described as a disorder. In the previous version, which was version 4, hypoactive sexual desire disorder described a state very like asexuality, and it was very common for people who presented with asexuality as their orientation to be diagnosed with this mental disorder, even though it was supposed to only be applied to a patient if they were personally distressed about their lack of interest and wanted to fix it. But because there was a clause in there about interpersonal difficulties that the state was causing, you could still be diagnosed with it if, say, your spouse was upset about it. So, happily, the more recent version, the DSM-5, did manage to throw in a couple of caveats about asexuality, calling it out by name, saying that if a person was asexual, they shouldn't be diagnosed with HSDD, and they shouldn't be diagnosed with any other sexual aversion or arousal disorders. But unfortunately, not everyone in the psychological community uses that as a Bible, and until very, very recently, it was released this year in 2013 as I'm making this video, it was until very recently completely fair game to diagnose somebody who was asexual with a medical disorder, and that's very, very clear, institutionally recognized prejudice and discrimination against asexual people. Not to mention that also, if you are a married person, you can go to a relationship counselor and by and large they will try to fix the asexual person, but they won't talk to the other partner about any kind of compromise. It will always be perceived that we're the problem child in any relationship, and that will be focused upon. Whereas if it's just something that you're trying to pursue therapy for, say, an unrelated issue, anxiety, depression, some other issue, asexuality is often something that the psychologist or the therapist will focus on very narrowly because it is so commonly assumed to be a sign of disturbance and a sign of, say, loneliness and social problems. So it tends to be something that asexual people have reported, dozens of asexual people have reported having problems with their mental health professionals because of their asexuality. And furthermore, actually medical doctors even, I know more than one person who has been prescribed testosterone supplements in order to get their sex drive up, when if just one person in the series of people that they saw about why they are not interested in sex like everybody else had known about asexuality or had believed that it was a real thing, that wouldn't have happened, and there were always consequences. So that's a really good example. And finally, higher rates of depression and suicide. This has not been explicitly studied. There's been no official scientific study of the asexual community's mental health, but it is true that there there are a lot of gay and lesbian and trans people who have higher rates of depression and suicidal thoughts. So there has been the establishment of the Trevor Project, which is a suicide helpline, and they started getting calls from asexual people and they didn't know how to help them. So they worked with one of the asexual organizations, Asexual Awareness Week, and prepared some materials to train their volunteers. And it seems really odd to me that some people in the LGBT community might look at that and say, no, there's no evidence that these people are experiencing anything hostile in their environments, but they're calling suicide lines. Unfortunately, there has been also some backlash from some people in the LGBT community who have said that it's a bad idea to include any kind of asexuality resources in the Trevor Project's resources because they think that the volunteers would use that information to try to talk people into being asexual, or talk people into thinking that even though they're gay, that they should just repress their sexuality because that's how they're interpreting what asexuality is, some kind of repressed sexuality or celibacy or something like that. So people have actually said, no, don't help the asexual suicidal people. And the fact that we're calling that line, searching for a queer perspective from somebody who might be more likely to be equipped to help us, does suggest there's a problem that needs solving and could be solved through allyship with people who are suffering from similar problems. On top of all this, a lot of people really underestimate how difficult it is to grow up invisible in a society. When your sex ed class leaves out any mention of asexuality and drills into your head that everyone is going to feel this when they get older. When you start being the only person who's not feeling the connections that other people feel. When there's nobody like you on television who's not getting fixed. Then you're just not very likely to grow up to be a well-adjusted person in a society like that. Some of these people who scoff at us for daring to pretend we have problems are actually holding us to a different standard than they hold members of their own community. I mean, some groups, like trans people, are way worse off and less represented in our society than the rest of the LGBTQ, but nobody says that LGBT people need to sit down and shut up because trans violence is so much worse than what they deal with. That comment earlier that I got about how we're not oppressed because we can give blood, it ignores that some members of the gay community can still donate blood, like gay women and basically everyone who's never had gay sex with a man, and some trans and non-binary people too. And it wouldn't be right to say to those people, well, you can donate blood, so you're less oppressed and you need to shut up. There are also tons of intersectional issues because a good percentage of the asexual community is LGBTQ themselves. They may be in a same-sex relationship, may be transgender, or both. But even for those of us who are cisgender and aromantic or heteroromantic, we do have to deal with the issues that I listed earlier in my numbered list. It would really be best if instead of insisting that we cannot and do not experience any kind of discrimination, you actually took a look at the evidence. If you sarcastically demand that we tell you about our experience when really what you want to do is invalidate us, maybe what you really ought to do is listen when we answer you.